What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on Game Dev Underground. Today I have a special guest. I have Andre Taron. How you doing, man?
Pretty good yourself.
I'm fantastic. I'm excited for this video. So in this video, we have some data from Steam Spies from April 2018. So it's a little bit dated, but it's all of the data from all of the Steam Spy stuff from every genre, everything you can imagine. And we're going to go through it and kind of see what we can determine from the actual data. Andre, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and how you fit all into this puzzle?
Yeah, sure. So I basically reached out to Tim because I'm a huge fan of his show, and I'm not a developer myself. I have to say that I'm a more like a business analyst. I analyze data for public institutions and create reports. And I'm still a gamer, so I have this morbid sense of entertainment, and I occasionally make myself some dashboards just to analyze like numbers for games. And I reached out to Tim concerning this here for the a dashboard that I had about Steam Marketplace. So referring to what you were saying, Tim, like the data itself is outdated a bit from April. So we have the data up until April, but it has a lot of insight concerning a lot of genres and tags that from which we can take away a lot of conclusions.
Cool. So just like you said, so the data is a little bit outdated. We're not dealing with up-to-date data, but the data that we have is up until April, right? So we have all the data before that as well.
Yeah, so it's basically as if we were taking a screenshot from April 14th.
Okay. So we have everything up to that. So just a disclaimer, like this data isn't 100% like on point, but it's going to be able to show you some patterns and some trends. And whatever we kind of decipher from this, we can kind of extrapolate that it's probably still going to be relevant to what we're doing now. It's just not 100% up to date. It's maybe 6 months behind, right?
Yeah, but
Okay. Cool. So, Andre, first, I would like to start off, and I would just like to ask you, because you're the person that's been over this data multiple times. You're the ones that put this whole dashboard together. Is there anything that like sticks out to you? Anything that's like super interesting that you just want to maybe share that comes apart in the data?
well, for me, there was a few things. Well, I think we can see the flood of games that is coming up, and which is like great for availability for gamers. And when we speak more about developers, I was just thinking that perhaps we should include uh, some new methodologies on how we approach games, game design, in order to find niches that haven't been done so that we don't necessarily fit with all of the flood of games. So I thought that would be pretty cool and interesting.
Okay, cool. Is because you actually sent me a video when you contacted me. You actually showed me that like you were showing me the breakdown of the different genres. Can you
Yep.
kind of go through that a little bit and kind of explain what you kind of explained in the video?
Yeah, sure. So like here in front of my screen, I have currently a chart just to show the Steam market. But typically, what I actually do is I make myself some very convoluted dashboards since I am more familiar with those. So like let's say what I would typically do is I would put as much information as possible, and all of this information can be interacted with. So for example, here I have the number of games that were released per year and the amount of owners per game in terms of median ownage. So for example, like a game that was released in 2017 right now, the median amount of owners is 3,500. Uh,
That's interesting data right there.
yeah.
So that shows like it seems like 2014 was probably your best bet for at least in modern history. It was a good time to release a game.
Yeah, well, although it's for sure there's a lot of hidden assumptions that we have to make clear.
Okay.
Uh, like for example, for sure, the longer game has been out on the market, and the more there are opportunities for people to buy it over time. You know, so a game that's been sold for that was released in 2017, for sure, there's going to be a lot less people necessarily than a game that has been on sale for 3 years, because I think that there is still a bit of the tail in sales, even if most sales are done upfront, like on the release day or release week or something like that. So we have that data here. Then we also have another interesting chart about price distribution of games, and we can see for each year how many games were released and their current price point. So there's kind of this trend for the last about 5 years or so, where we can see that more and more percentage of the games being released are released at a price point of $0 to $5. And
That's interesting.
interestingly, hmm?
I said that's interesting. Like,
Yeah, and also interestingly, it seems to be like taking over the $5 to $10 range, because if we look at like $10 to $15 range, that's pretty stable, and the only one that's being encroached upon is really like the $5 to $10, as if like maybe, I don't know, I'm not an industry expert at all, but maybe it could be that people are trying to release games and they see that from $5 to $10 it's not selling, or they're trying to adjust at a lower price point, but it's not necessarily the best strategy.
yeah, I would imagine. I know from personal experience, a lot of people assume that the lower cost your game is, the more copies you sell. So I
Yeah,
see a lot of people actually underprice their game because they think that it means more volume, and that's not necessarily true.
yeah.
Do you think this $0 games? Do you think this also covers the rise of like microtransactions as well, and like games that maybe are free but have like hidden costs with them?
Oh yeah, definitely. And for example, we can actually click on one of those categories, for example, and then it filters out the list of games. And for example, here we can see a lot of games have been released with a price point, and kind of sometimes depends. So sometimes there's some inaccurate data, like I'm pretty sure that H1Z1 is not $0. But maybe if we look Air Mech Strike or Soul Worker or Guns Up, I'm guessing those are free games.
Okay, but they probably have other forms of monetization, basically.
Oh yeah, definitely, but that
Okay,
would not appear in this data.
gotcha.
So that's the other thing about the data, is we only have an estimate, and it's also an estimate. It's not an actual number, but it's an estimate of the amount of owners of a game, and
Okay,
it's not revenue.
right, and it's. I think we should stress the word owners
Yeah,
because it doesn't mean that it's customers, right? It doesn't mean that
yeah,
people bought
definitely.
the game. It could be free games, it could be press games, it could be humble bundle, it could be whatever. So the data can kind of be deceptive in that way.
Yeah.
Cool. And then what's on
So
the bottom left? I'm curious. The list of tags.
yeah, so bottom left is where we have all of the tags associated to each game. So if we wanted, we could see from the list of games here what games are in the FPS genre. So we can just click here, and then it will filter out all of the other lists. So then we can see the same information as we've seen, the number of games that were released with the median owners and price distribution, but also like the list of games here.
Okay. So I'm curious. Let's say theoretically, I am trying to make the ultimate indie game. Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to base my game completely on this data. I want to say like whatever this data says, that's the game I want to make. What can this data tell me about like the perfect tag, maybe the perfect genre, or maybe the perfect price? Like, what do you think that game would look like based on what you have here?
I wouldn't recommend doing such a thing at all in the first
Neither
place.
would I. Just to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Neither would I.
Uh,
Um,
j- but like, to answer your point, I think it's you just have to adopt your methodology to that. So the data will not let you know what game would be perfect to sell. For example, the guy behind Steam Spy actually went on to help build Fortnite and release Fortnite Battle Royale, if I remember. And he did some analysis, but the kind of analysis that he did would not probably be accessible through only the data that I have here. And his analysis was proving the point that, for example, people that play MOBAs typically will not switch from one MOBA to the next, but people who play survival games and battle royale games are very prone to switching from one to the other. So he helped Epic Games understand the fact that there was an opportunity for them to move into the battle royale genre, contrary,
That's
for example, to
interesting.
MOBAs.
That's super interesting. So it's not so much about like what the best genre is, but it's more things like that where these people are more likely to give up their favorite game or move on to other games.
Well, for sure, there's some genres that are a lot more popular and in which you can sell a lot more. That's for sure. It's just that I'm saying that sometimes beyond the raw data, or rather the low amount of data that I have, there's some additional insight that you absolutely require if you're about to base your conclusion on that. Because, for example, I'm pretty sure we could find out MOBA genre in here, and we would have like some great numbers in terms of how many players have played those. But if we were to base your assumption only on that, I think you would be at a disaster point. Like, yeah, median amount of owners per MOBA is 240,000,
Wow.
which is like very high compared to other genres. But it's not necessarily translating into sales because, as we can see here, all of those their price points is all zero.
Yeah.
So you have to monetize it in some other ways. And also, as we mentioned, those are owners. It's not necessarily players, and it's not necessarily buyers. So
Right.
sometimes they might just have it in their library and they're not necessarily playing it. And I also have another chart later about like playtime. How many people, like, what's the average and median playtime per genre?
It's also interesting too because like that's the 236 is the median, but if you look at Dota 2 compared to Paladins, it's 112 million versus 15 million.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So that data is very skewed towards the top, right? It doesn't necessarily equate to all of the different numbers. It doesn't mean that if you release a MOBA that you're going to get 236,000 players by just releasing that game. Uh, that's interesting to look at.
Yeah, like the median is oh, I just noticed there's a mistake somewhere. But the median is like 50%, right? It's like right here. 50% of games have more than a value.
Right.
So that's different than the average, where having a very big number would skew towards the upper trend, the upper value. So that's why I typically use the median a lot more than anything else.
Yeah, median seems like it'd be more useful there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So, what can you tell us then? Like, obviously, with those caveats in place, like that the data is not necessarily going to tell you which genre. Is there anything interesting you can tell us about maybe tags or genres or anything like that?
Well, the number one thing I would personally find the most useful is if you're able to create something by making something new out of two genres that are both popular and familiar to people. So, for example, if we have here a very simple list where you can just find two tags. So, for example, I'm typing up here horror, and I would like also, let's say, Metroidvania. Well, I can quickly see, is there someone or other games already in that genre, and how have they been performing? And interestingly enough, it seems as though Batman Arkham Asylum is considered both Metroidvania and horror.
Wow.
So it's above all, I think it's a great tool in terms of doing a market study, just to see where are how have your competitors tackled this market? Have they done some things that were great and very well appreciated by people, and have they done mistakes that you can avoid?
Totally. I think it's also, I mean, because when you create a game out of two genres, not only are you targeting two audiences, right?
Yeah.
But on top of that, you are delivering an experience that is most likely unique or unique-ish to each one of those people because you're combining multiple different things. And like you're showing me this list here. This list does not look very big.
Yeah, no.
Uh, it's tiny compared to some of the other lists that you've showed me. So I think that's good news for someone that potentially make a game like that.
Yeah, and especially like sometimes you can find some interesting things. Like for example, myself, I play Civilization, but I'm not a big fan of all 4X games. I'm only a fan of Heroes of I was I would say Heroes of the Storm, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Age of Wonders, and Civilization. But like all space games, 4X space games are not my thing. Maybe I'll try eventually Endless Legend, which I heard some pretty good news about. But you know, if you wanted to see if there's some space for something else in the genre, you could just go here and say, okay, maybe a 4X and I don't know, RTS, and then you would have the ability to see, you know, what's your competition. Or there was another one I thought was interesting, was not 4X, was an RTS platformer.
Oh wow!
And
Seems like two hard genres to combine.
yeah, and yet someone seems to have done very well with the 1,500,000 owners.
Wow, with one
Yeah,
game in the list. That's interesting.
and he's like the only one seen as a platformer RTS.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a video about how to come up with game ideas or good game ideas. And the basic premise of the video is just to combine two genres. Just take two genres that you like. It seems like not only is that a good game idea tactic, but it's also a good business tactic.
Yeah.
Seems like that's really cool. Is there anything else interesting as far as like the tags or genres goes that you wouldn't mind showing?
Well, you know, something I find interesting could be entirely different than someone else's conclusion. For me, I typically look at those lists a lot more for my own personal gaming habits, where I'm trying to find hidden gems. And someone
Oh, so you actually use this list to find games?
yeah, occasionally. Like I have to point that one out because I probably will end up trying it out. That one, it's what was it? Roguelike Metroidvania. Yeah, that's it. Because I was wondering if Dead Cells is worth it, and what are the other ones that might also be in the same category? Because I really loved Rogue Legacy. That was one of my favorite ones. So right at the bottom here, I spotted a robot named Fight, which has a lot of playtime on average, and median not as much, but a very good score still nonetheless. So probably, you know, as a gamer, I'll eventually end up playing Dead Cells, and if I do like it, I'll eventually carry on to a robot named Fight. But those are, I know that as a gamer, those are my choices here. You know, those are all the games that have been produced in that category.
So this kind of list is useful too because if you're making a game like this, not only can you tell potential viability, I mean theoretical viability of what you're producing, but also you can maybe find stuff similar to it to research, like what kind of marketing did they do, or what kind of players do they have, or maybe you could even target their players directly for your game launch.
Oh yeah, and like especially about the mechanism. As a game designer, you want to see what works, what doesn't. And for example, if you analyze Rogue Legacy, you would see that there's a certain loop of, I would say, almost addiction, where have you played Rogue Legacy?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so you're familiar with the whole system where you jump into a game, it's about, let's say, 10, 15 minutes, and then at which point you have gold, you have to spend that gold, and you're kind of incentivized to spend it immediately. And once you spend that gold, now you're wondering, gee, how do my new upgrades play out? So you kind of jump back into the game.
Yeah, I love that core loop. It's a fantastic loop.
So, like looking at that list of competitors, you can analyze. Well, you have a pretty quick list of, okay, I definitely have to play all of these games because they've made a whole bunch of great things and mistakes that I have to learn from.
Yeah, totally. Is there? I'm curious because we're looking at this list for like user score, for example. And is there any correlation between like user score and something like playtime? Is there any
Um,
way to look that up?
yeah, you could. It's just that I didn't do the Python script to or R script to do that correlation.
Okay.
But sometimes, there's not a lot. There's very often there's not enough games in there to do something that would be statistically viable.
Okay, that makes
Like,
sense.
if you're only analyzing 10 games, you could have an outlier with one mechanism that's doing, something very exceptional that everyone else just hasn't implemented.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious. One of the things that you showed me too in email was about the romance tag.
Oh yeah.
Would you be willing to kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so what's funny with the list of tags is you can compare what list of tags, what tags are popular or not. And so if we rank them according to the median score here, romance is actually very high up there, which I was very surprised. I would have thought that it was associated with, you know, really bad games, or I don't know. I
Well,
was,
it's like I've heard because I know what you're saying. I've heard like not necessarily that I played any romance games, so I'm not no one to judge, but I've heard it used almost as like a bad romance novel. You know, like it's something that
yeah.
you would like kind of explain away as something that just is everywhere. So it's interesting to me to see that too. Maybe this is an underserved genre or tag.
Yeah, but from what I've seen from the games, like if we look here, um, romance has been associated to a lot of very different type of games. So it's also hard to sometimes, you have to be careful about that because, for example, I see Unipop here, which I think is a kind of soft porn game or something. But then you have like Final Fantasy VIII, which I haven't played that one, but I'm guessing there's like a love triangle or something. And then you have two other porn games, and then you have again Final Fantasy. You have Baldur's Gate. So those are games which have very different mechanisms, very different settings for that romance.
Right.
But I'm guessing that any games that's getting that tag of romance, um, I guess if we can take any insight out of that, is that people still remain human even in their games and they like social interaction or the perception of social interaction with, not even necessarily as me interacting with an NPC or something, but seeing nice interaction between people the same way that you would have probably good story or good story as a probably high ranking tag.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that it's a tag, so it's not necessarily the same thing as like a genre.
Yeah.
I wouldn't classify these games as like romance genre, but like you said, they're tagged on to a lot of games in a lot of different genres. Um, so it might be worth just taking into account if you release a game and it's got some romance in it. Maybe tag it with romance. You know, maybe like really think about all the elements of your game and tag it accordingly.
Yeah, there's that. And also, just in terms of designing, if you look through all of the tags, you can get an insight into what people appreciate. You're going to see stuff like romance. You're going to see stuff like good music. Uh, there's a whole bunch of things that are high ranking in there. Probably the problem though is that they don't necessarily have a correlation with high sales though.
Are there any correlations that you found with high sales? Anything particular? High sales per like unit or something?
Well, the problem is that there's 300 tags, more than 300 tags, so you can't necessarily just group all of them and try to make a correlation. So you have to do subgroups. But there's like a quick correlation where if you just look at single player, multiplayer, co-op, local co-op, online co-op. I think it's no news, but online drastically increases your sales.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, we can have a look at that right now. Just
So even like local multiplayer.
Well, that's the problem too, is the fact that a lot of local multiplayer games um, might have nothing else to offer. A lot of games I've seen tag local multiplayer because they're not online. So typically, local multiplayer games I think are lower up there.
Okay.
There's also split screen. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So, like we can see very quickly, uh, online co-op games are doing a lot better than just co-op games.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it seems as though co-op games are doing better than multiplayer.
That is interesting. And I noticed like if you look at copies owned, it seems like the multiplayer is pretty similar to the single player. But the that's an interesting because I would have thought that more people owned multiplayer games with the way that things are going.
Uh, do, do, do.
I know personally, I actually, whenever I invest in a game, it usually has some kind of co-op or multiplayer capability. Almost always. So that's interesting to kind of see that in the data.
Well, and this is I'm just going on a lag, but I think that Humble Bundle. No, wait. Okay, I was about to make an assumption, but it's completely wrong. I was about to say that Humble Bundle might be giving out a lot of single player games, which A, I'm not too sure at all, and B, that would be contrary to to the conclusion I was about to say. So I really don't have a clue actually.
So which one of the so you've got games in store, copies owned, the median price, the median owners, the average owners, and the user score. Which pieces of these data do you think is important to look at for like if you're actually thinking of releasing a game of this type? Which do you think is more important to pay attention to?
For me, it's just like looking at the different tags and making th- because when you're releasing a game, it's a bet, right? Or rather, when you're designing a game, it's a bet. You're betting that the investment that you're pouring into your 2, 3, 1 year development cycle will be worth it in terms of sales at the end of the day. So for me, it's more about making sure that you're creating something that um, has a lower chance of failing.
I would
And
agree
if,
with that. Yeah.
yeah, and if we look at those, for example, we can probably insinuate that 4 player local games where the only thing that you can do is just play local multiplayer with your friends. Although it's you're going to get a lot of reactions if you go to a like PAX or if you go to your local pub and showcase your game where people are like clumped up onto the couch. At the end of the day, the data doesn't seem to be proving your the feasibility of your bet.
Yeah. I would bet, and again, this is just an assumption, but I would bet the local multiplayer games probably be higher on console than on computer. Because I know personally, like, I very rarely bring my friends like, hey, let's play a local multiplayer. That almost seems weird to me to like have them sit next to my computer and play. But I would totally do that on console, right, where we're all sitting on a couch or something like that. And it's interesting to me that the local multiplayer and 4 player local actually seems like based on this data that you're less likely to succeed whether if you just focus on single player, like a great campaign.
Yeah, although you also have a lot more competition and stuff, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
there is. Let's not forget that there's competition everywhere.
yeah,
But yeah, I think because it sucks because like anybody can tag their game anything now in Steam, and I would imagine that like there's probably a lot of stuff that isn't quite right, or just people tag stuff, or all kinds of stuff happens. So I would imagine there is some intricacies in the data where we can't see, but it's interesting to see that multiplayer, at least online co-op especially, uh, is significantly higher than even something like co-op as far as like owners go.
yeah,
I think that goes with the technical complexity for developers too. I think local co-op is really easy to do. Online co-op gets significantly harder. So,
yeah.
but it seems like it might pay off. You know?
But and sometimes I think that there's a few insight that might be interesting. Like for example, if we look just at the concept of co-op here, we can see like um, people just playing four-player local. I'm guessing would probably be a party game, and that's not as interesting as having a co-op campaign. But surprisingly enough, having just local co-op seems to all be almost be faring better than co-op campaign, and perhaps this could be explained by the fact that you're not necessarily going to invite and sit next to your friend for I don't know 30 hours to complete the whole campaign, right? Sometimes you just want to have a quick
Yeah.
experience where your friend can jump in and out without necessarily completing the whole thing. And I know that when I used to play I forgot the name of the game, but I think like you could play co-op in Halo if I remember. But I
Yeah.
never remember playing the entire co-op campaign with my friend. I
Yeah.
couldn't rely on them.
It was hard. My brother and I used to play the Halo campaign, and I used to have to beg him. And then we would always get in fights and kill each other because there was friendly fire and everything. So
Yeah,
that was fun. But yeah, I mean, the co-op experience in Halo, for example, that was that blew my mind. Like I didn't realize like how different that made the game. Experience the same thing with other people, and it's a lot more common these days than it was then. But it's still, I could totally see how it can add a whole nother, breathe more life into a game if you add something like that.
yeah, and like also a bit going back to my point where I was mentioning that people don't necessarily can't rely on each other. I think obviously that's why online multiplayer is doing so well because you can find people for the small bit of reliability that you need. But also, it seems that just having co-op rather than a whole full campaign, but basically just delivering on the experience rather than the full blown responsibility of campaign seems to be appreciated.
Yeah, I think my experience actually mirrors the data too because I know like with my brother, for example, we don't have long phone calls. He lives in Los Angeles. I'm here in Florida. I won't sit there and talk to him for an hour and a half, but we might fire up our Xbox and play through an online co-op campaign together, right? And we just talk the whole time. We kind of like chill, relax. Same thing with multiplayer. We've played competitive games as well, and like for me, at least everybody that I know in my life that's not near me, I actually that's how I hang out with them is like on a video game, right? Like if they're not near me, that's usually what ends up happening. So that's it directly correlates with my experience of like um, I would definitely buy games specifically to play with other people.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
it's like a common experience.
Yeah. Now you have I see a couple tabs down there. You have niche exploration and playtime. Is there anything you could tell us about some of those?
So niche exploration was basically the one I showed where um, the list of games will
Oh,
only
right,
show
okay.
if you have two tags. So it's a quick way to see if there's something that you could find, and if A, you do have competitors, and B, what are those, as we mentioned. And then there's just another quick one, which I thought was I was doing that for my own interest. I was just wondering what are the tags that people play the most. Um,
Wow, this is interesting data.
so up here on the y-axis, we have the median owners. Here we have the playtime. So the further to the right, the more people seem to be playing those. And it goes from red to green depending on how many, what's the user score. So basketball is actually seems to not be very well scored, but that might be just because there are 17, for example, bad games. Who knows? Maybe people keep buying the NBA games, but they keep also rating them as low.
That's interesting.
And then if
It's
we can,
interesting that some of this data, like the colors are almost orange, but they're way up there on the playtime list. That's
uh,
interesting that people continue to play games that they may not necessarily like.
yeah, like this one. Well, it's agriculture. Seems as though there's been a lot of bad games, I'm guessing, in the agriculture genre. I'll try to bring up the user score per game. Yeah, it seems as though like there's quite a few games that have been very lowly rated. So apparently, don't
Okay,
buy agriculture simulator historical farming.
I'm sorry if the developer watches this video. I apologize. No, but okay, but this is good data to see, right? Like, um, that it because I asked you before if there was a correlation between user score and owners, um, and that might be hard to find. But I would have thought that the higher the playtime, the higher the average user score. I would have thought that that would be a correlation there.
Well, not necessarily, because I think it's a common experience for devs to see in their reviews people with, let's say, 250 hours saying I do not recommend this game, because typically
Blows my
people,
mind.
oh
That blows my mind. Like, how could you invest that much of your life and then give it negative review?
yeah, because like there's a whole bunch of people where they review the game based on their last 5 minutes before quitting the game. So
That's
if,
crazy.
for example, you've been playing for 5 weeks straight, and then at the end you're angry that there's no end game content, then you're going to say, I don't recommend you investing all of your time in that, although I enjoyed the game for 4 weeks.
Yeah. I remember because Destiny has been I've been a huge fan of Destiny ever since it came out, and Destiny 2 came out, and for the first 4 weeks everything was like great. Everybody was like, "I love this game. This game is awesome. It's so much better than Destiny." We were all playing it, and then we got to the end game content, and everybody was just like, "Well, this sucks. This is horrible." And there was like a big thing because that was when the whole EA Star Wars Battlefront 2 thing was going on, and there was a big backlash, and people started refunding because they I guess they locked some users out of the one of the activities or something if they didn't buy the DLC. And it was crazy because I was on the subreddit just like, what is happening? These people literally spent the last 4 weeks saying how great this game was, and like you said, just like that, boom, everything went negative. There was a campaign to just like review dump, and it's crazy how that works.
Yeah.
And we could be seeing some evidence of that, I guess, here. Not necessarily bad games, but just a bad negative perception. Um, that's weird.
But also, sometimes it's hard to look at per tag, because sometimes there are some tags that are associated with a specific genre, specific license,
Okay.
where one license might be owning the space. And I had actually removed those outliers, but if I bring back the outliers, we'll be surprised to learn that apparently cycling is the best.
Cycling.
Yeah.
Really?
So if I remove cycling here, I have to wait up for the graphic to go back. It's going to be a lot more convoluted to the left bottom left right here, but we can see Lego is apparently played a lot, but I'm just waiting. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll move this here. Okay, so we have cycling here. So, if we were
Oh
to
my
just
God,
look
that's
at the
you are
data,
kidding. That's way out there.
we could consider that, cycling manager games are the best because the playtime median is very high.
So you hear it here, folks. You want to make a game that people play, make a cycling manager. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Cycling manager game.
Hey, who knows? We would have to ask the developers of Descenders, but maybe they looked at that and they thought, there's maybe there's a niche for us in there.
You know what? The marketing guy for Descenders knows his stuff.
Exactly.
So I follow him on Twitter. Mike Rose. He's given talks on this on data and stuff before. So I would not be surprised if this data correlates to that decision for him to market that game. I think he's the publisher as well.
Yeah.
So that's actually really interesting.
Yeah. So that's why, like, I thought it was really funny when I first saw it.
Wow, the things you find in data. Okay, so like you remove that just because it's like so far out and it kind of messes up the whole visual of the data.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Is there anything else like that, stuff like that you might be able to see or find or show that is interesting like that?
You mean Outliers?
Outliers or anything that like could be a potential opportunity for somebody looking to like get into a tag or a genre for their game.
Well, I think the opportunities are more like if you look at niche exploration, just to see what can you cross and see what you could do different. Like for example, I love 4X games, and I was thinking about that the other day, and I was thinking, like typically 4X games, um, you either have like three categories. You have civilization, which is a category on its own, and everyone kind of understands right away because you have a general understanding of how civilization went. It's normal to think, oh, we went from the agriculture to now space exploration and nukes and technology. That's normal to people, and they immediately understand the whole process. When you look at space games, the only people that will buy space 4X games are people who really love space, because for everyone else, you're just looking at the blank space. You don't understand the technologies that are being offered. And when Civilization tried to go into the 4X genre in space with Beyond Earth, Civilization Beyond Earth kind of tanked, probably because, in part, it was offering something that people did not understand. And my point is that if you look at what's possible in the 4X genre, for example, exploring niches, you would find a whole bunch of things are missing. So, for example, you could maybe think 4X game with, I don't know, your childhood, where you're a kid and you're exploring your neighborhood, making new friends, uh, unlocking new newspaper routes, securing new adults and their lots in which to play, fighting off against other gangs of childs. And, it's just that going through that experience, you would understand as a person that has had that experience of childhood, you would immediately understand what are the technologies and possibilities of the game. But right now, if someone would be wondering, gee, is such a game, does it exist? You would find that answer in niche exploration, and you would find like, no, all games are space, civilization, like the human history, and fantasy. But like the playtime is not necessarily something that's as interesting for exploring opportunities, other than just finding the games that have a lot of playtime. Like if you want to
Right.
directly compete with someone that he's the only one in his genre, like Cycling Manager, maybe that, I don't know. We would have to ask the guy from Descender, but maybe he did have a look and see that Cycling Manager was appreciated. So maybe it was part of his thought process to do the same thing, but for biking, mountain biking.
I would be willing to bet he saw this data. So what's interesting? So I think the playtime data though it may necessarily not be an opportunity financially, but it can kind of tell you if you want people to play a bunch of your game and make a good game. This might kind of show opportunities in like where to direct your efforts, if that makes sense. But I also want to say that like if you take a game like Binding of Isaac and you take a game like maybe Hollow Knight, which is like a linear experience, those games are not going to really correlate on playtime because Binding of Isaac is so replayable. That game is designed to be replayable, whereas like a linear single player experience is probably going to be played once or twice. Maybe if it's got some more, like if it's got stuff like Rogue Legacy, basically like that adds a lot to the replayability. But it's interesting to see that though, because I think every developer deep down, they would love to see a game high on this list. You know?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that was also interesting because when I was looking at the games that have very high median play times in the rogue space, of course, like Binding of Isaac is like way up there.
It's an outlier.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an outlier. It just like crushes every other game.
That's so interesting. I wish there was more like analysis into that because I played games similar to it, but that game it just I feel like it draws me in way more than other games. The same thing with like Rogue Legacy. Like even though I'm not necessarily a fan of like the art style or like even the play style, I just feel like the way that they designed that core loop of fight a bunch of stuff, get gold, then you have to spend your gold, and then you jump back in to test out your new upgrades. Like that whole loop is so well done.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see if there was like any. I doubt it's possible, but any way to see if the theme of the game ties into it or the fiction of the game or anything. Because Binding of Isaac has a really strong thematic kind of thing to it, and that's
But
interesting.
it would be hard to find additional insight out of that without the additional required data because, for example,
Yeah,
here I only have playtime average, playtime median, but we don't have um, the data on when is that time accumulated. And for example, I remember playing Rogue Legacy in 3 days, and then I never really retouched it.
that's
Well,
interesting.
see, whereas I would guess that Binding of Isaac, I haven't played that game, but I'm guessing that people play it occasionally on burst, but also it's a game that you go back to.
Yeah, FTL
Even
is kind of like that too. I've noticed on Twitch, I still see people playing FTL, and it's been what 4 or 5 years since that game came out.
yeah,
It's interesting to see.
because it's the type of game where you can just like play 1 hour and you're good, and you can come back and you get a new experience. But like the loop cycle doesn't necessarily entice you to spend your entire 3 days just doing that.
Yeah, cool. This is awesome, dude. So we're gonna wrap up a little bit, but is there anything else that you want to share that you thought was interesting or might be interesting to developers as far as like the data goes?
As far as the data goes, I would say don't try necessarily to find insight into the actual data, but try to improve your methodology. It should absolutely be part of methodology when you look into a new game or in the development cycle to see if the game is still relevant. To occasionally look at what are the games that are similar to yours in what are they doing that's either better or worse than yours so that you can just deliver a better product by learning from the mistakes and good shots of others. But
That's
like
interesting. Yeah.
this should definitely be in there.
I agree with you. So rather than like look at this data and say, "Oh, what kind of game should I make?" You should say, "I want to make this game, but what games are similar to that, and what are they doing right, and what are they doing wrong that I can kind of implement in my game?"
Yeah, like you want to build for yourself a process rather than just because like following the data would be basically following the trend, and you don't want to be the last one to follow the trend.
Yeah,
Whereas if you have a process for yourself, you'll always find better bets.
absolutely. I always tell people by the time you hop on the trend, by the time you hear about the trend, it's probably already over with. Like, especially with the development time it takes for an average game, a year, 2 years sometimes. It's hard to look into the future and make sure that trend's still there.
Yeah.
You know.
And
Um,
just the one last thing also, like if we go back to everything we saw, there was Cortex Command. That game basically took a bet on two genres with RTS and platformer. That did not exist up until that guy was there, and now he's still the only one there. And there's a lot of things that technically data cannot show you anything else other than the fact that it's non-existent.
yeah. That's really great insights, dude. I really appreciate you spending the time with me and showing us all of this. It's been awesome.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay, so is there any place on the internet that people can find you that you want to share?
I don't really have social media presence or anything, but I guess if people are interested in asking me a question or anything, I guess they could send me an email. But I'll send the I'll maybe you can just add the information later, tag to the
Okay,
information.
we will put the information
Yeah.
down below. Make sure you don't share anything you're not comfortable with. It might get sent out on the internet. Okay, Andre, thank you so much, dude. I appreciate you doing this for me.
Yeah.
All
Appreciate
right,
your
see you
time.
later.